Hey there, and welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really critical topic in medicine, obstructive uropathy. But look, we're not just going to stare at this as some isolated, standalone condition. Instead, we're going to treat it like a giant puzzle, and it's one we're going to solve together using a really structured, rock-solid clinical framework. So if you've ever felt, a bit overwhelmed by the sheer volume of urological conditions out there, you are definitely in the right place. We're going to organize all this info so clearly that it'll stick with you long after this explainer wraps up. So let's dive right in. Here is our roadmap for today. First, the Dapsicamp framework. Second, defining the obstruction. Third, upper versus lower tracts. Fourth, acute versus chronic retention. Fifth, surgical and medical management. And finally, number 6, post-obstructive diuresis. All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, the DAPSI-CAMP framework. So whenever we're evaluating a patient, especially in acute, high-stress scenarios, we absolutely need a reliable, professional backbone. So what exactly is Dapsicamp? Well, at its core, it's basically the gold standard for clinical communication and documentation. It stands for the accurate, timely, professional, and confidential exchange of clinical information. And honestly, using a standardized tool like this is absolutely crucial in high-stakes medical environments. It's what ensures safe, continuous patient care, whether you're, writing up referral letters, doing ward notes, or typing out discharge summaries. Now take a look at how this acronym actually breaks down. It's a very specific sequence: definition, etiology, pathogenesis, symptoms, investigations, complications, assessment, management, and prognosis. This isn't just some random list to memorize. It's a cognitive map. And this exact sequence is going to guide the rest of our clinical evaluation of obstructive uropathy today. We're basically going to walk through these exact steps to build a complete 360-degree view of the whole condition. Which brings us to Section 2, defining the obstruction. Now, to understand exactly what is blocking up the urinary tract, a beautifully simple way to classify any voiding dysfunction is just to ask yourself 2 fundamental diagnostic questions. First up, is the issue due to the bladder or the outlet? Meaning, is it a failure to store the urine? Or second, is there some sort of neurologic dysfunction happening, which usually leads to a failure to empty? Just asking these 2 questions instantly helps you categorize the root of the problem, way before you even order your very first test. When it comes down to physical blockages, they can basically pop up in 3 distinct locations. They can be luminal, meaning the blockage is literally inside the tube itself, like a stone or a blood clot. They could be mural, which means the problem is actually within the wall of the tract, like a stricture or a neuromuscular dysfunction. Or they can be extramural. This is where something from the outside is pushing in and compressing the tracts, kind of like a pelvic mass or retroperitoneal fibrosis. Visualizing the plumbing like this really makes the etiology incredibly intuitive, right? Moving right along to Section 3, upper versus lower tracts. So, to really make sense of the symptoms, we have to use the rule of clinical contrasts. And the absolute key here is location, location, location. An upper tract obstruction, so think the uretero-pelvic junction or the ureters, well, that often presents with this sharp loin or flank pain that famously radiates right down to the groin. You might even feel an enlarged kidney when you do your physical exam. But contrast that with a lower tract obstruction, like a blocked urethra. In that case, the pain is going to manifest right above the pubic bone. And if you tap on their lower abdomen, you'll find a distended, palpable bladder that sounds totally dull to percussion. It's pretty amazing how the symptoms map perfectly to the anatomy. Okay, Section 4, acute versus chronic presentations. Now, the timeline of how your patient actually presents is going to completely change your entire clinical approach. And the ultimate defining separator here, it's pain. Acute retention is this agonizing, sudden inability to pass urine. Make no mistake, it is a surgical emergency, and the patient is going to be in severe distress. But chronic retention, that is sneaky. It's insidious. It can be completely 100% painless. The bladder just slowly stretches out over months, sometimes ballooning to hold well over 1.5 liters of urine. Because of that, these patients often just present with overflow incontinence. Basically, they're leaking urine simply because the bladder is just too full to hold even one more drop. And because chronic retention can be so incredibly silent, the downstream consequences can be a huge shock. The back pressure of 1.5 liters of urine can travel all the way back up the system to the kidneys. In fact, as the Oxford Handbook of Clinical Medicine points out, you shouldn't be surprised to get a frantic phone call from the lab telling you your patient's serum creatinine is 1,500 micromoles per liter. But here's the really amazing news. Once you finally relieve that chronic obstruction, the renal function usually bounces right back to baseline after a few days. So it's severe, yes, but highly reversible damage. All right, let's get into Section 5, surgical and medical management. let's figure out exactly how to diagnose and fix these blockages. Your diagnostic toolkit really needs to be sharp here. You're going to run bloods to check renal function and urine cultures to hunt for any infection. Now, ultrasound is absolutely your imaging of choice to spot hydronephrosis, which is that dangerous swelling of the kidneys. But here's a totally surprising fact from the clinical literature. In about 5% of obstruction cases, an ultrasound actually won't show any distension at all. 0. So, if you highly suspect a blockage, or if you need to pinpoint its exact level, you absolutely must follow up with a CT scan. Okay, I need to shift to a much more serious tone for a second because this next point is a massive red flag. If you see a bilateral obstruction, meaning both kidneys are blocked, or if you have literally any obstruction that has a super infection on top of it, you are dealing with a life-threatening emergency. An infected, blocked kidney can rapidly spiral into overwhelming sepsis. This requires immediate, urgent intervention. You literally cannot wait. So, that urgency gives us a really logical step-by-step approach to draining the system. Step 1. If the blockage is lower down, you relieve it with a urethral or a suprapubic catheter. Step 2. If it's an upper tract obstruction, you're going to need a percutaneous nephrostomy, which is a tube placed directly through the skin into the kidney, or you'll use a ureter stent. And then finally, Step 3 is definitive correction. Once the whole system is safely draining and your patient is nice and stable, then you go in and treat the actual underlying cause, whether that turns out to be an enlarged prostate, a tumor, or a stubborn stone. And that brings us to our final stop. Section 6, Post-Obstructive Diuresis. So, what actually happens immediately after we successfully relieve one of those massive blockages? Well, the danger definitely isn't over just because the catheter is in. Unplugging that drain can actually trigger a massive, potentially dangerous loss of fluid. The kidneys can temporarily go into the state called salt-losing nephropathy, causing the patient to basically pee out several liters of fluid a day. If you aren't paying super close attention, your patient can become severely dehydrated and electrolyte depleted incredibly fast. This means they need strict daily weight checks, really intense fluid balance monitoring, and constant close observation of their blood electrolytes. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a bit of a provocative thought. We know for a fact that chronic retention can be completely painless, right? But why? Think about how non-obstructive causes, things like diabetic neuropathy or even multiple sclerosis, might actually deaden the parasympathetic nerves of the bladder. Could a totally different systemic neurological disease be completely silencing the bladder's warning signs in your patient? It's this fascinating intersection of urology and neurology that just proves how unbelievably interconnected the human body truly is. I really hope this structured Dapsicamp walkthrough has transformed how you view obstructive uropathy. Keep utilizing these frameworks, stay curious, and as always, keep learning.